If you're interested in getting started with the Raspberry Pi 4 but you don't know where to begin, then this is the video for you. Stay tuned. Welcome to Crosstalk Solutions. My name's Chris, and the Raspberry Pi is absolutely one of my favorite pieces of tech in the world. In this video, we're going to go over everything that you need to know to get started with the Raspberry Pi 4, including what hardware you should buy, how to install the operating system, and then some initial steps once the operating system has been installed. First and foremost though, what is a Raspberry Pi? Well, basically, Raspberry Pi is a single board computer. Now imagine a computer that has all the same components as a desktop PC, but in a much smaller form factor. The Raspberry Pi 4 is a huge step up from the previous generation Raspberry Pi 3, adding onboard dual monitor support and the option to have up to 4 gigabytes of RAM. All in all, this is a small, silent form factor computer that starts at just $35. You can use the Raspberry Pi 4 for all different kinds of projects, ranging from digital signage, robotics, retro gaming consoles. You can use it for Pi-hole, which provides ad blocking for your entire network, or one of my favorite uses for these devices is network monitoring. Now, above all though, it's an amazing learning tool for Linux, for prototyping new ideas, or for just creating something spectacular. You're pretty much only limited to your imagination. If you search Raspberry Pi projects on Google or YouTube, you're going to find an endless list of fun projects to try out. Another great resource is Magpie, which is the official Raspberry Pi magazine. I'll have a link down below if you want to check out Magpie. It's completely free, and each issue details tons of really cool Raspberry Pi based projects. But before you get to any of these cool projects, you have to have a Raspberry Pi. So the first thing we're going to do is start off with one of my favorite Raspberry Pi kits, which includes everything that you need to get started, and that is the Raspberry Pi CanaKit. So there are all kinds of options for Raspberry Pi cases and accessories. Here's one that I have here. This is a Raspberry Pi 4 with a Pi Maroni fan shim to keep it cool, as well as this really neat Pi Maroni rainbow case. So again, this is just one option. If you don't know where to start though, a really good place to start is with the CanaKit Raspberry Pi Starter Kit. Now that basically comes with everything that you see here, and it's literally everything that you need to get going with Raspberry Pi. The starter kit includes a Raspberry Pi 4, and there's 3 different versions because Raspberry Pi 4 has 3 different versions of RAM that it can come with. The 1 gigabyte Raspberry Pi 4 CanaKit starter kit is $79.99. The 2 gigabyte version is $89.99, and the 4 gigabyte version, that's what this one is here, that's $99.99. Now the links to all of this equipment is down below in the description. Those are Amazon affiliate links. You don't have to buy through our affiliate, but if you do, it doesn't change your price at all. It just gives us a small percentage back for our effort in creating these kinds of educational videos. And certainly we appreciate any affiliate sales that we receive. So in the starter kit, you get your choice of Raspberry Pi depending on how much RAM you want. If you're just going to be using it for testing, the 1 gigabyte version is perfectly fine. However, if you're interested in using it for any sort of graphics or like a desktop environment, I would definitely deck it out with all 4 gigabytes of RAM. The starter kit also comes with a case. It comes with a 32 gig. This is not the exact card that it comes with, but it does come with a 32 gig Evo Plus Class 10 micro SD card. It comes with these heat sinks that you can see I have already placed onto the Raspberry Pi. It comes with a power switch. Now this is really handy. It's something that I didn't think would be such a big deal, but I actually use this power switch all the time rather than taking the USB-C connector and pulling it in and out all the time anytime you want to reboot the Raspberry Pi 4, which you're going to do a lot. You can just click it on and off with this power switch. It makes it much easier, and there's less chance of damaging the USB-C connection. You also get a power supply or a power adapter, a micro SD card reader, an HDMI to micro HDMI cable. Keep in mind that there are 2 micro HDMI ports on the Raspberry Pi 4, and you only get 1 cable. So if you want to run dual monitors, you will have to buy a second micro HDMI to HDMI cable. And finally, you also get the quick start guide on Raspberry Pi, which includes a troubleshooting guide, as well as a lot of other useful information about the device, such as the various components, and a reference for what each of these GPIO pins does across the top of the board. There's also a link here that you can see. For more projects, you can go to www.canakit.com/pi-projects. So let's take a closer look at the Raspberry Pi board itself. There are a number of connectors. So right here we have our Ethernet connector. That is a gigabit Ethernet port. We have two USB 3.0 ports. We have two USB 2.0 ports. On this side, we have a 3.5 millimeter audio jack. We have dual HDMI or micro HDMI connectors so that you can run dual monitors. We have our USB Type-C power connector right here. In between the audio and the second micro HDMI, this sort of long, slender piece right here is a camera connector, so you can connect up a Raspberry Pi camera. Then we have a DSI display connector for if you want to connect it out to, for instance, the official Raspberry Pi touchscreen. You can connect that right here. Across the top, we have our 40-pin GPIO header. Then we have our 4-pin PoE header right here. It's these 4 little pins that are sticking up next to the GPIO header. And that is so that you can put on a power over Ethernet hat in order to power the Raspberry Pi 4 through Ethernet rather than having to use the micro USB connector. If you flip this over, on the bottom right here is where we're going to insert our micro SD card that contains the operating system. Flipping it back this way, we have a few components to look out for. This one in the top corner is the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth module. The one under this big heatsink here is the CPU. And then under this smaller rectangular heatsink right here, this is going to be your RAM. Next, we're going to plug all of the different components into our Raspberry Pi 4 to get it ready to receive the operating system, which we're going to do next. That'll end up on this little micro SD card. So we're going to put the micro SD card aside for the time being. And we want to start by plugging in the keyboard and mouse. Now, keyboard and mouse are going to plug into the USB ports. I would recommend plugging them into the USB 2.0 ports. That way you reserve the higher bandwidth of the USB 3.0 ports, the blue ones, for other devices that might be able to utilize the faster speeds, such as an external hard drive. Flipping it to the side here, we're going to plug in our micro HDMI. Now, there are 2 HDMI ports. If you're only going to be using one monitor, you want to plug into HDMI 0, which is the port closer to power. And it is actually labeled HDMI 0 so that you can tell which one is which. There we go. So now we have keyboard and mouse and monitor plugged in. Next, we're going to plug in a network cable. Now, this is optional, so you don't have to plug in a network cable. You're going to plug it right into the Ethernet port right here. Now, I say it's optional because there is wireless, you have this wireless chip on the board itself. So you can technically connect this to your wireless network and use it that way. However, in most cases, Ethernet's going to be faster, right? So for at least the initial setup of a Raspberry Pi, I typically try to use a hardwired Ethernet connection rather than rely on the onboard wireless. Finally, we have our power switch. This is the power switch. You want to take your USB Type-C power supply, plug it into the back end of the power switch. What you're going to see here is it has a red LED that is on when the power switch is on, and it's off when the power switch is off. So make sure that it's off, and then we're going to plug it into our Raspberry Pi power connector. And now we are completely set up and ready to rock and roll. The next thing that we want to do is prepare our micro SD card. So you take your micro SD card, you insert it into your computer. In this case, I'm using Windows to do all of this, but you can use Mac or even Linux to do all of this same sort of stuff. You just have to sort of reconfigure the instructions a little bit for those platforms. If you're following along in Windows, I have full instructions for all of this on the Crosstalk Solutions blog. That will be linked down below. So if you want to follow along and it's easier for you to read text rather than listen to me jabber on about it, go to crosstalksolutions.com, click on blog, and then click on the Getting Started with Raspberry Pi 4 blog post. Okay, so in this blog post, we have download Noobs and flash the micro SD card. That's the next step. Now, Noobs is the new out-of-the-box software package for Raspberry Pi. And essentially, Noobs allows you to install not only Raspbian, but a number of other operating systems that you might want to play with for Raspberry Pi as well. So it just gives you a little bit of extra exposure to what is possible with Raspberry Pi versus Raspbian is just the straight up operating system and you don't get that extra exposure. Once you have your micro SD card inserted, we need to format it. If you have a brand new micro SD card that you just purchased, you can likely skip this step. You don't need to format it, but since I have an SD card that I've used before, I'm going to format it, and I'm going to format it using a program called SD Card Formatter. Here we have SD Card Formatter. I want to select my micro SD card. Now, incredibly important caveat here. Make sure you select the correct drive letter. If you select, for instance, like a USB storage drive, you can absolutely format it and you might lose all your family photos or something, okay? So make sure, double and then triple check that you are formatting the correct card or the correct drive with SD Card Formatter. This is unrecoverable if you do this and mess it up. With that warning stated, mine is the D drive, and we can see here that it's a 32 gig card. It says 29 gigs capacity, but that's just sort of a little bit of overhead in there. It's actually a 32 gig card. We're going to do a quick format, and I'm going to call the volume label Ras Pi. And we're going to say format. And yes. There we go. So now we have Ras Pi all set up. Formatting was successful. The next thing that you want to do is download Noobs. So there's a link to Noobs in my blog post, but here's the page. As of the recording of this video, the current version is version 3.2.1. You can download a zip file format, or it's actually a little bit faster to download it in torrent format. Once you have it downloaded, you want to unzip that file, and you're going to see something like this. So here is Noobs. So I'm in my Noobs directory. I have unzipped it, and this is these are all the files that were in that zipped archive. So I just want to select all of these files. We're going to right click, we're going to choose copy. And then we're going to go over to our newly formatted micro SD card, and we're going to say paste. This is now going to copy the entire Noobs OS over to the micro SD card. Once it has completed, we're going to take out the micro SD card and plug it into our Raspberry Pi. Raspberry Pi is all plugged in. We have our micro SD card ready to rock and roll. You basically just want to flip the Raspberry Pi over and stick the micro SD card into the slot here. It only fits one way, so if it doesn't work one way, flip it over and try it the other way. And then once everything is plugged in and ready to go, just hit your power button, and we should pretty immediately see our screen come alive here. There we go. So we have Raspberry Pi now booting up on this screen. I'm going to take the camera and I'm going to bring it in to zoom in on just the screen itself and talk you through the Noobs installation process. Once your Raspberry Pi boots up with Noobs installed, this is the screen that you're going to come to, and we can see that we have Raspbian as our Raspbian Full as our recommended first choice. Now, I see a bunch of different choices in here. I see those because I have my network cable plugged in. If you did not plug in a network cable and you're relying on wireless, then you may only see Raspbian Full in this list. That's perfectly fine. What you want to do is bring your mouse over here or hit W to get to wireless Wi-Fi networks, and then you can select from a list of available Wi-Fi networks and connect your system just like any other PC that you would connect to wireless. Once you do that, it will populate the rest of these items because those are items that need to be downloaded. So if I wanted to install, for instance, this one here that says data partition, or I'd say this one here, LACA RPi 4, this one would require a download. So that's why it doesn't show up until you actually enable a network, or it can see the internet, I should say. But we're just going to install Raspbian. So I'm going to check Raspbian Full, and then we're going to click Install, and then we're going to say Yes. Once the installation is completed, just press OK, and then the Raspberry Pi is going to reboot, and you will come up with this screen here. So we can see our Raspberry Pi background, and then we get the start of our Welcome to Raspberry Pi wizard. Note here that I can see an IP address. In this case, I got 192.168.200.201. I have that IP address because I'm plugged into Ethernet. If you are connecting over Wi-Fi, you may not have an IP address yet, but we're going to connect to Wi-Fi in just a second, or be given the option to connect to Wi-Fi in just a second. So let's go ahead and say Next to get started. We're going to select our country. In my case, I'm United States. American English is fine, and time zone is Los Angeles. We're going to use US keyboard and click next. Now we want to choose a strong password. So the default Pi user has a password of Raspberry. You can see that right here. But we want to set our own password. Make sure you set it to something nice and strong, but that you're going to remember. Then we're going to click next. And now it says set up screen. The desktop should fill the entire screen. Tick the box below if your screen has a black border at the edges. So mine does have a black border at the edges. You can see that it doesn't quite make it all the way to the bevel around the monitor here. So we're going to check this box and we're going to say next. And now we have the option to connect to our Wi-Fi network. Here we can see all of the available Wi-Fi networks. If you want to connect to Wi-Fi, this is where you can select your network and click next. In my case though, I'm already connected with Ethernet, so I'm just going to say skip. Now we're going to update software. So I'm going to show you how to manually update software as well, because this little wizard tends to not work, or at least it hasn't worked for me in the past. So we'll do both mechanisms here. We'll try to update the software here by just clicking next. And if it gives an error, then we will move on to the manual method. All right, looks like the updates did go perfectly fine that time, so we're going to say OK. And now it says setup complete. Your Raspberry Pi is now set up and ready to go. Press restart to restart your Pi now, so the new settings will take effect, or press later to close the wizard and restart the Pi yourself. So we're just going to go ahead and restart now. And then when this comes back, we'll talk about how to run those updates manually, just in case anyone else got an error and has to rerun updates on their own. Okay, we are back, and as you can see now also, the screen extends all the way to the bevel of the monitor, so it has fixed that one issue. Let's go ahead and open up this icon here. This is sort of the black box. It's labeled terminal, and this is our Linux command prompt. So we're going to open this up a little bit more here, and let's talk about how to manually run updates. Now again, this command that I'm about to tell you is in that blog post. So if you do have to run the commands that I'm about to show you and you need a reference for how exactly they're typed, go check out the blog post. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to say sudo apt-get update, and we're going to say enter. What this does is it goes out and sees if any new packages are available to update. And then we're going to say sudo apt-get upgrade -y. Since we just updated, there shouldn't be anything that is available to update, so we are put right back to the prompt. But if you did have updates to run, it would have just run through all of those updates in the command line here. All right, so our system's completely up to date. Let's do a few house cleaning items though. We're gonna come up here to the Raspberry icon. We're gonna click on that. We're gonna choose Preferences, and then we're gonna go to Raspberry Pi Configuration. Now on this first screen here, there are a couple of things that we can do. For instance, if we wanted to boot to the CLI instead of to the desktop, we can choose to do that here. We can give our Raspberry Pi a host name if we like, and we're going to uncheck this box that says login as user Pi. This is our auto login, you can see right here. So it's a little bit more secure if we actually have to type in the password every time we log in and not let the system automatically log us in as the Pi user. Let's now click on the Interfaces tab, because having a Raspberry Pi is great, but it'd be also great if we could get to this remotely. So we're going to enable remote SSH access so that we can get to the CLI, and we're going to enable remote VNC access so that we can see the desktop here from a different computer using VNC client. All right, so with those both enabled, we're going to say OK. And now let's flip back over to my main computer so that we can connect to this system remotely. Our Pi is up and running. Now let's connect to it remotely. We're going to show you a few ways to do this. Let's start by how to connect to the Linux CLI. So there's two main ways that you can do this from Windows. From Mac, basically you can just pull up a terminal window and say SSH pi at IP address, much like we're about to do here with the Windows command prompt. So as of Windows 10, and I think there was some update, I'm not sure exactly which one, but there was an update where now you can SSH natively in the Windows command prompt. So much like you would do from Mac terminal, you can run the command prompt and say SSH pi at, and then the IP address of your Raspberry Pi. In my case, it's 192.168.200.201. And it's going to say, are you sure this is okay to connect to? We're going to say yes. It'll only ask this question the first time. And now we can enter our password. So there we go. I am now connected remotely to the Raspberry Pi using Windows command line. Now we can also do the same thing with PuTTY, and PuTTY is a great little program. It's free to download. There's a link in the blog post if you want to download PuTTY. And the thing that I like about PuTTY over the Windows command line is that it allows you to save your session. So you don't have to continuously remember what the IP address is and that sort of stuff. You can just save your session and be done with it. So in order to connect with PuTTY, you want to first launch PuTTY after you've downloaded, and then right here in the host name or IP address, we're going to type 192.168.200.201, or in your case, you'll type the IP address of your own Raspberry Pi. Now, if you want to save this session, you can come down here and say Raspberry Pi or something like that, and then just click Save. And now you have this available to be loaded at any time. In order to connect, though, you just click Open down at the bottom, and we're going to log in as Pi. If it's the first time you've connected, you will also receive an extra pop-up that says, are you sure you want to connect to this? Check out the device fingerprint, etc. And then you will get to the login. So then we're going to log in as user Pi and then our password. And there we go. So once again, we are now logged in. This time we're logged in with PuTTY instead of the Windows command line. But what if you want to connect to the desktop of the Raspberry Pi remotely? To do that, we're going to download VNC Viewer, which is available at realvnc.com. So here's the VNC Viewer. After you downloaded and installed it, this is what you're going to see. And we can either just enter in our VNC server here, or we can say File, New Connection, and then enter in our IP address. So 192.168.200.201. And the name we're going to call this is Raspberry Pi. And then we're going to say OK. And then just double click on it. This is available anytime that you open up VNC Viewer. So again, checking the fingerprint. Are you sure you want to connect to this? Yes. And now we can punch in our password, username Pi, and our own password. Now you can click the box to remember password if you like, but that's going to be less secure than if you type the password in every time. So we're going to say OK. And there we go. We are now connected to the desktop of our Raspberry Pi, and we can go through and do all the same stuff that we were doing over on the monitor, but from a remote computer instead. So where do you go from here with the Raspberry Pi? You're now able to connect to it remotely. Everything should be working great, and honestly, the sky's the limit, right? Whatever you want to do, whatever you want to learn, you can now do with this Raspberry Pi, and it is a really, really excellent learning tool. If you want to expand your learning quite significantly, I would recommend investing in something like this. So this is the Freenove Ultimate Starter Kit for Raspberry Pi. This has detailed tutorials for how to hook up all these cool little different components here. So you get a bunch of little servos and diodes and speakers and joystick buttons. And this one I think has even like RFID card readers and stuff. Not only that, but it comes with this 434-page PDF tutorial written in 3 different languages. So if you want to learn Python, C, or Java, you just download this, the PDF comes along free, and then you can start building, cool stuff with it. And this is really the best way to learn, because not only do you learn the circuitry and how all of this stuff fits together so that you can take that knowledge onto your own projects, but it also teaches you the coding, right? So it teaches you how to create the Python scripts, and basically you can then use those Python scripts that come as examples in order to move those into your own projects that you want to develop yourself. This one was pretty interesting. This was basically just how can we make an LED with this little servo thing here dim from all the way off to all the way bright and every little stage in between. And it's basically taking an analog controller here, converting that analog controller into a digital signal that the LED understands. So this was a pretty cool little project, just one of the 100+ projects that are included in this Freenove Ultimate Starter Kit. But honestly, just start learning. It's such a great learning tool. I love Raspberry Pi 4s, and if there's anything that you guys would like to see in terms of videos on the channel about the Raspberry Pi 4, put those down in the comments below. Alright, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, make sure you give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please click subscribe. My name's Chris with Crosstalk Solutions, and thank you so much for watching.